So, where in the Bible is Colossians?
New Testament.
Yep.
Pauline epistle.
Yep. It's a New Testament Pauline epistle. So when was it written?
Good question.
What do these things say? So
Late
let
50s,
me.
be my guess.
Here's an NIV study Bible. Now these are
6 or 7.
these are
This is an old
printouts.
faithful by the look of it.
I've also got printouts from those books that I showed you before. So, Luke, do you want to? This is from the Zondervan Study Bible. This is from. Sasha's looking up something.
Well, it was written while Paul was in
Faith
prison.
Life?
Also maybe it's in the 60s, early
Who
60s
wants
then.
Who wants to see the Tyndale commentary introduction?
And he wrote it about the same time that he wrote Ephesians.
And there's
162.
this is the introduction from the introduction to the New Testament.
I'll take that one. Does someone else want this
You
one?
want-
I got the. Where's the
I'll just listen to everybody
Yeah,
else.
it's heavy. So the ESV Study Bible introduction. Whoops. I've got a whole bunch of
Doesn't tell.
helps in here.
So we've got an hour one that he wrote about 60 AD, Malcolm, while in prison in Rome. Right?
Yep. 60. What's that in?
Oh, yeah, here it is.
The internet.
No,
No, DSV, right. Okay.
ESV.
First purpose and
Just goes to show what a good attitude he had, eh? Right there when he was in prison.
That's-
Really? The ESV. The ESV Study Bible says the letter was probably written circa AD
NIV
62.
doesn't tell you.
Doesn't give you a, well,
Apparently, a follower of Paul may have penned this book.
Is that N.T. Wright?
Sure, I believe that.
Is which it says down the bottom which book it comes from?
Person and mood.
Oh, okay. Yep. They wouldn't believe that actually because they're very conservative. But they do present a whole range of perspectives. That's
So
the
what
point
date
of
have
an
we decided
introduction to give a
that's
range.
61.
61.
Well, it's between 60 and 62,
Yeah.
I think. So
Well, that's 61's the middle. So.
yeah, you get. That's what you'll find when you do this research. You'll find that some people will say 60, some people will say 61, some people will say 62.
What if he called in David?
That's actually quite a small range because for some books you'll get a much bigger range than that. Yep.
Sorry, so with this book,
Yep.
so it gives you like a little introduction
Yep.
to the book through, like, so you read this along with, so it's like you read chapter 1 to 23,
So
and
the
then
book,
you read this from.
You read that first.
the book is like so. This is taken from a Zondervan Study Bible. It's
Yeah.
just I've got the electronic copy, so
Yeah,
I
that's
copy
fine.
that. And so if you had the physical copy, it would be you'd see that here, and you'd go through and read it, and then it would have the letter
Oh, okay.
with the commentary underneath like
With the
this.
explanation, all the
Yeah.
tidbits.
That's
yeah.
cool. All right.
So the study Bibles have introductions and commentaries
Yeah, I
as
have-
well. So you have a commentary on the text,
But even on that one.
Yeah.
I've never
a
seen
very brief commentary, but still a useful one.
Get your books.
Okay,
Oh, it's got a nice big picture.
so who's the author?
Read.
Oh,
Paul, with a remote possibility that somebody else wrote it,
Timothy.
but unlikely. Well,
Well, how do you find
one of
that?
the things that confuse people is that the letters, Paul's letters, were often written by what's called an amanuensis. Is that the right pronunciation?
So,
And that's basically a type of secretary. But they're a little bit more than just somebody who takes dictation, because sometimes an amanuensis might actually put things in their own words,
Yeah.
and that changes the style a little,
Is that the scribe?
That's right.
like a scribe. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, which might explain why there's some differences sometimes.
yeah.
Also.
It's not because Paul was illiterate, but it seems likely that Paul wasn't very good at writing, perhaps because his hands were cramped up from all his tent making, or who knows. But there's
Probably
in one of the
does go through
letters he says, "Look how I
Colossians, right?
look how I write in my own hand. Look at such big letters that I'm writing." He did, yeah. He had some thorn in the flesh, so maybe it was in his hand. Yeah, it could have been his eyes. So recipients, who were the recipients for Colossians?
People of Colossae.
The people of Colossia?
the church.
Colossae? The church of Colossae.
Paul, I'm writing this in my own hand in Colossians.
Oh, it's in Colossians that he says
Yeah.
that. Yep. So, so the church of Colossae. What's the historical context? It says that in the introductions. It'll give you the historical context. In fact, the ESV Study Bible even has the history of salvation context.
Context.
So it's often
Context
called the
is-
purpose, the occasion, or the background, something like that.
So there's a thought
It's
that
the right way of living. It's about how to live properly.
Yeah, but what's the historical context? So why did what inspired Paul to write?
refute the
There was false teachers
hearsay.
at the time. That was the reason.
False
why.
teachers? Yep. What sort of false teachers?
They were talking about rules and regulations.
Yep.
And
Like some Jewish stuff?
yeah, the Gentiles had to be circumcised. The Christians had to be circumcised.
there was something called the Colossian heresy.
yeah.
So right, there's
Yeah,
that
yeah, this
that
has
was
got
like 10 years
heresy.
ago and I can't even remember what it
Yeah.
was.
Yes, you're right. This has got heresy.
It
Colossian
mixes
heresy.
this weird Jewish stuff
The
with
theme
this
of
Hellenistic
Theme
stuff,
of
this Greek sort of
Colossians
stuff,
is
and
an
it's sort of this
emphasis,
pseudo,
emphasis.
this
Oh,
weird
got it.
religious, like asceticism, really weird sort of.
Right.
So they'll basically having these weird rules put. This is what you must do to
Yeah.
be part of the church, which were incorrect.
Yeah, some people were teaching it. There's some other interesting historical context. Did Paul plant this church?
No, Epaphroditus.
Epaphras did, yeah.
He'd never been there, or had he?
Epaphras.
If he'd been there, he didn't plant a church. Epaphras came from, where was it? Ephesus, I think, and he heard Paul preaching and was converted and took the message to Colossae. So it wasn't even one of Paul's churches, but it was a sort of daughter church of one of Paul's churches. And Epaphras is the one who seems to be accompanying the letter, perhaps. There's another bit of historical context. There's another letter that's related to this one.
And that's the one.
to Ephesians.
Ephesians.
Nope.
No,
Ephesians
yeah,
is
that's
close to it because you
Okay.
read them and they're like twin letters.
Right.
They're very similar, but they're not
Is that
simultaneous.
the
No.
Philemon.
Philemon. That's
Oh,
right. So Philemon was written and probably sent at the same time because Onesimus lived nearby.
Well, that's probably why.
Right.
I mean,
was
Philemon
before
lived nearby.
Colossians.
Yeah.
Okay, right.
It's interesting, just what you were talking about before in Colossians chapter 2, verses 6
Yep.
through to the end of 8, sort of hints.
Yep.
In 8 he says, see to it that no one takes you captive,
Yep.
which is like a slave,
Yeah.
through hollow and deceptive philosophy,
Yeah.
which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of this world rather than on Christ. Maybe he's referring then to this Hellenistic Greek plus the other thing you were talking about before.
It is interesting. You see influences like the passage that we're looking at has a lot more to say about slaves obeying their masters than about any of the other relationships that are mentioned. There's two other types of relationships, and it's as if Paul's been really influenced by Onesimus's plight. I don't know why they have these crazy names, and because he's a runaway slave, right? And when the letter to Philemon is saying, here's your slave, I'm sending him back, don't be nasty to him. But Paul doesn't ask him to let him go free. But he sort of implies that if he was a good Christian, he should do that. But it's all between the lines. It's really beautifully written, very, very clever, and you can see that in Colossians as well. So that's a part of the historical context of the message, and in fact the specific text that we're looking at.
Paul had plenty of training, didn't he? Right from when he was
Yeah, and he was a genius. Like the guy must have had an IQ of like 170 or something. He's such a genius. You try and follow the logical flow of Romans, and it's like, my goodness, makes Einstein look like a bumbling fool. But that's my personal opinion.
Depends if your brain works with physics or not. And quantum.
Well, I think theology is much more complex than
Yeah, it
physics.
Quantum physics?
What was the purpose of this letter?
To get the people on track.
That's right.
Not to
Yeah,
worry about false teachings or
that's right.
abstract teaching.
Yeah, to return them to the true faith, to the core
So
doctrine.
Malcolm, all these things like heresies, like people not believing that Jesus was fully human and fully God, or not believing in the physical resurrection of the body of Christ. All this sort of stuff must have been around for a very, very long time.
Yes.
All these heresies that they had to squash. So, these letters are just so important.
Yeah, they are.
To spell,
They are.
to spell that out.
And
all
the
sorts of crazy ideas going around.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
and the beauty of the way that God works in the world and in the church is that we see in sort of a kernel form every heresy that sort of arose later already expressed in the early church so that the apostles could address it. So there's not full-blown Gnosticism at the time of the letters, but there's proto-Gnosticism. So we see the ideas of Gnosticism, some of the core ideas being addressed in the letters, and the same with things like
So, excuse my ignorance, Gnosticism.
it's
Thank you.
it's Gnosticism is
Okay, you know what narcissism?
it's actually an idea that's come back around in recent years, but it's basically the idea that we are saved through knowledge,
Special knowledge that only certain
secret
people
knowledge, and there's this
Secret
whole
knowledge.
complex
Got to be
reality
Scientology.
that you
Yeah.
need to
Yeah.
know.
Is
Yeah.
that the group that Paul was preaching to and talking about the unknown church or something in Athens?
Oh,
No, that was probably the Stoics,
Stoics, okay.
and other
Yeah.
groups at the time, Epicureans maybe and stuff like that. We have Epicureanism nowadays too. It's called evolution, but the another. So what was the structure?
It was pretty.
It's pretty much what
it's
we
pretty
said.
standard, isn't it?
Yeah,
Salutation,
it's the
thanks
bog
everything's
standard
body.
structure.
Yeah, standard structure.
And it's pretty easy to see where the divisions are. In fact, we'll look at that soon. So there's some of my answers. One bit of context that we missed was that Paul was in jail in
that's
Rome.
Right. Paul in jail. It's pretty important.
And that the struggle between Jewish law and and grace was long resolved. So that's not the issue that Paul's addressing in Colossians. And Gnosticism is yet to mature, so he's not addressing pure Gnosticism. But there's some sort of proto-Gnosticism in the Colossian heresy.
So here's a question. In
Yep.
the last chapter of Colossians, in verse 16, Paul is commanding and he says, read
Yep.
this letter of Colossians
I
in,
see it.
and you in turn read the letter from Laodicea, but we never got to see that one.
Yeah, and we see other lost letters mentioned too, like the middle letter to the Corinthians and stuff like that. So there we don't have all of Paul's letters, but
Do you reckon God designed it that way? He only wanted us to have certain ones.
I think so. And I think
So were they just lost in history, or was they not put in as part of the canon?
well, the way that the way this is part of the historical context of all of the letters was the way that they entered into the text, and in fact, in the introduction, I think, to the New Testament, that book actually talks about the process of the canonization of the letter. That's a part of its introduction. They're concerned about that, and it is a helpful thing. But all of these letters, of Paul's letters, all of them that we have, the church has considered them so important and so fundamental and so full of right doctrine and inspired by the Spirit, basically, that they copied them very carefully. And the early copies that we have, the earliest that we have are about probably 60, 70 years after the original manuscript. Those early copies are very carefully written. They're not sloppy copies. They're high quality. They went to a really good quality copying shop, not just Officeworks or whatever. And so we know that the church valued these letters, and they were preserved by being copied and spread around. So we have thousands of copies of things like the letters that were spread and even translated as well. So from a very early stage, these were recognised as scripture. In fact, Peter, I don't know if it's first or second or third Peter, I think first Peter, Peter talks about Paul's letters as scripture. So it was from a very early stage that these letters were recognised as really important. And I'd say because of that, the ones that we don't have, obviously they were misfires on Paul's part, or maybe they just were so narrowly focused that they weren't really compelling for anyone else.
Actually, in my introduction, it's got Romans written about 57 AD.
Romans,
Mm.
yep. So Romans is, yeah, it was a bit before Paul went to Rome. So
Well, maybe the letter from Laodicea might have been
too loud to
same
see.
sort of themes.
As Colossians, yeah.
Probably.
Yeah. So that's possible too. There
Is
could
that
be
what-
some letters that were just replicas and
No, remember they were very closely. Remember the map on Sunday we looked at?
they're very
Yeah.
close to
Colossians
each
and
other.
Laodicea are really close.
Yeah.
A few kilometres apart.
Yeah.